Bazan in advance for listening carefully, didn't Mr. Bazan? He's listening. Yes, he's listening very carefully, I can tell. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land that which we gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Bonjour à tous, mon nom est Alexander Yegley.
I'm Alexander Yegley, and I'm the Ombudsman. I would like to thank the Chair of the Standing Committee on National Defense of the House of Commons for having invited me here today to appear as a witness within the framework of this study on review of the impact of the procurement process for the Canadian Armed Forces.
Explaining my office's role in federal procurement, as this is my first appearance at this committee during my tenure as Procurement Ombudsman. The Office of the Procurement Ombudsman opened in 2008 with a focus on providing Canadian businesses, mostly small and medium-sized, an avenue of recourse for procurement and contracting issues. My office operates at arm's length from all other federal organizations, including Public Services and Procurement Canada. While I report to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, the Minister has no involvement in my office's daily activities or the contents of my report. The Minister is required to table my annual report in Parliament. Nous sommes une organisation fédérale neutre et indépendante.
We're a neutral and independent federal organization that has a mandate
My legislative mandate is to, 1, review complaints from Canadian suppliers about the award of certain federal contracts below $30,300 for goods and $121,200 for services. Second, review complaints regarding the administration of certain contracts, regardless of dollar value. We rarely receive this type of complaint, but when we do, it most often pertains to late payments or non-payment. Third, we review procurement practices of federal departments to assess fairness, openness and transparency, and consistency with laws, policies, and guidelines. These larger systemic reviews examine the way federal departments do their contracting in general and often involve the review of multiple procurement files. In terms of good practices to ensure fairness, openness, and transparency in federal procurement, my office has identified 3 highest-risk procurement elements. We use these risk elements to establish 3 lines of inquiry, which are 1, the establishment of evaluation criteria and selection plans, 2, the bid solicitation process, and 3, the evaluation of bids and contract award. These systemic reviews play 2 important functions. First, they identify areas where departments can take concrete steps to improve the overall fairness, openness, and transparency of their procurement practices. And second, they point out good practices that can be emulated by other departments. Any recommendations made in these reviews are designed to improve practices and do not focus on individual complainants or winning and losing bidders in the same way that reviews of specific complaints do. In 2018, my office put in place a 5-year procurement practice review plan, which was identified and described the reviews to be conducted by my office. The planned practice reviews look at the highest risk procurement areas as defined by our extensive environmental scanning. As part of the 17 systemic reviews conducted under the 5-year plan, my office conducted a review of the Department of National Defense, which was published on my office's website in May 2022. We made several recommendations regarding D&D's procurement practices that required improvement and identified some good practice. An example of an area of improvement that was identified was inconsistencies in the bid evaluation process, including missing evaluation guidelines and results, and incorrectly awarded contracts. An example of a positive observation that was made is D&D consistently used standardized solicitation documents, which contributed to the simplification of procurement processes for both Canadian businesses and D&D officials conducting procurement. We made 6 recommendations for improvement to D&D and will follow up next year to assess the implementation status of these recommendations. D&D agreed with all of our recommendations. My office also offers dispute resolution services with the help of certified mediators from my office. Either a supplier or a department can request our mediation services, and both parties have to voluntarily agree to participate in order for the mediation session to take place. Mediation is a highly successful and effective service offered by my office, which unfortunately remains underutilized by federal departments. There are no dollar value limitations associated with our mediation services, and we can mediate contracts valued at $6,000 or $60 million. Our mediation generally only requires a 1-day mediation session, and these services offer a quick, inexpensive, and administratively less burdensome process to litigation. My office also conducts research studies on important issues in federal procurement. In 2018, we launched an initiative called Knowledge Deepening and Sharing to provide information and guidance to suppliers and departments. We've published a total of 9 KDS studies, and some of the topics we've written about to date include emergency procurement, the Chief Procurement Officer, and late payments. Mon bureau participe également et
My office also actively participates in the diversification of the federal supply chain. Up until now, we have organized 5 annual summits with over 2,000 participants, including Indigenous and diversified companies in the same room as government organizations and businesses from the private sector, providing services to help these businesses to obtain federal contracts.
component of federal procurement, and we hope to continue to serve stakeholders in a way that brings positive change. This requires our office to be proactive in some areas, and unfortunately, budget implications currently prevent us from continuing some of this important work. My office has been operating on its 2008 budget for the past 15 years, and for the first time last fiscal year, we sought program integrity funding to address critical gaps in delivering on my legislative mandate and government and ministerial commitments. This request was unsuccessful, but we have again put forward a new ask to address our funding shortfall in future years. We are acutely aware of the need of fiscal prudence and efficiency at the federal level and have been working diligently to ensure our operations are as lean as possible to best deliver on our mandate. However, as a result of my existing budget and the inability to hire additional staff, my office has had to curtail several vital activities for the current fiscal year and beyond. These canceled activities included conducting follow-up reviews to determine if my recommendations for improvement had been implemented by departments and providing information and guidance to Canadian businesses through our KDS research papers. This year, we are once again seeking program integrity funding. Without this additional funding, OPO will become a reactive organization and no longer able to effectively provide key services necessary for the improvement of federal procurement. I'm pleased to see the growing support of my office from the various House of Commons committees, and I'd like to thank the National Defence Committee particularly for the invitation to be here today, and I welcome all your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yeglich. Ms. Gallant, 6 minutes.
With respect to the replacement of the propulsion system of the Canadian Coast Guard heavy icebreaker Terry Fox, how did it come to pass that the bid failed to meet the mandatory requirements set out in the tender documents, yet won the contract anyhow?
Microphone.
Should we start my time over?
Okay, so with respect to the replacement of the propulsion system of the Canadian Coast Guard heavy icebreaker, Terry Fox, how did it come to pass that the bid failed to meet the mandatory requirements set out in the tender documents, yet won the contract anyhow?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. As I didn't conduct the review, unfortunately, I can't answer your question directly, but the intention obviously is if you're non-compliant with mandatory criteria, you should not be awarded the contract.
Okay, but if we go back to December 2019, the Liberal government said that only Davie was qualified to build the Coast Guard's new icebreakers over Heddle yet. Now the PSPC chose Heddle in favor of Davie to replace the icebreaker Terry Fox's propulsion system, as I mentioned before. Do you have any idea of what the conclusion that PSPC made that Heddle was now qualified to handle icebreakers over Davie?
So, Mr. Chair, unfortunately, I can't answer that question directly because I did not conduct a review on the matter.
Okay, we'll go to the Army then. There are urban operation training centers. So there's one in Petawawa, Gagetown, Valcartier, Wainwright. $500 million laser weapon simulators have been mothballed. It was part of the integrated soldier program, which uses simulated weaponry, but most importantly provides feedback to the soldier. How is it that this was just mothballed and shelved? How is it that a contract renewal for such a vital training system could have simply been forgotten? They forgot to renew it, especially at this particular point in time when the world's state actors are poised for war.
Mr. Chair, again, thank you for the question. However, I think the right person to answer that question is a representative of the department.
Okay, so we have several other procurements. Have you reviewed any of the procurements with respect to the Aurora replacement?
So just as a point of clarity, so the way my organization works, we have jurisdiction for complaints related to relatively low dollar value procurements. Mm-hmm. We have complementary jurisdiction with another organization called the Canadian International Trade Tribunal that has authority and jurisdiction at or above. So all of the projects that you're citing are above the monetary thresholds in terms of our review jurisdiction.
Well, generally speaking then, how can we guarantee that the PSPC is going to make programs follow the legal guidelines, come in on time and on budget so our armed forces don't have gaps in their capabilities?
Yeah, no, Mr. Chair, that's a fair question, and I think the appropriate answer there is to utilize the existing recourse mechanisms that do exist. So that is the nature of the Canadian International Trade Tribunal. So I would encourage, if there are active complaints, they can seek recourse from the Canadian International Trade Tribunal.
Okay, so are the Auroras too big of a project? Can I ask? Okay. The entire issue with these other procurements is not adding up. In your experience, is there a possibility that, given the bids are awarded on issues other than the requirements, is there a possibility that there would be political interference involved?
Again, Mr. Chair, unfortunately, I can't wade into that discussion, but the contract should be awarded based on the solicitation documents themselves.
So making sure procedure is followed is one issue, but another is the utter inefficiency with the rollout of these projects. Has the Office of Procurement Ombudsman identified any opportunities for simplifying DND's procurement practices?
We have. So as I mentioned in my opening statements, one of the things that D&D is good at is they do use standardized documentation. And the reason that matters is because, as you can imagine, suppliers are bidding on multiple opportunities across different departments. It's a little bit unique in the Department of National Defense, where many of the projects are very specific. However, in a general way, they use procurement documentation that's standardized, which helps suppliers from all across the country who are bidding on multiple opportunities to participate in an active way.
Are you in contact with international allies, procurement departments, and have you discussed methods on how D&D and PSPC can employ those methods to achieve greater project efficiencies?
So I have not engaged with international counterparts on defense procurement specifically, no.
Okay, so what findings led to the OPO in its review of D&D's procurement practices that led you to recommend that D&D should ensure the established electronic system accurately tracks, controls, and reports on its contracting activities and ensures all contracts required to be disclosed are?
Mr. Chair, and that's an absolutely fair question that I can directly respond to, which makes me happy. The D&D actually identified through our review of D&D documentation was a significant issue, and it was a shortcoming. So we sought 40 files for review, and we had to replace 19 of those 40 files. The process of obtaining documentation may sound somewhat administrative, but there is a real consequence there, right? So the lack of evaluation material means you cannot justify how you made decisions associated with awarding contracts. The lack of documentation around communication with suppliers means that you cannot say that all communications with suppliers were done on an equal and timely basis. So there are broad implications to documentation. So that's ultimately what led us to make that recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we left it on a happy note. There we are. Mr. Fillmore, 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for joining us today and for sharing your experiences and wisdom. Throughout this study, we have been hearing about and getting exposure to a variety of different kind of procurement processes that are in use in different jurisdictions around the world. But at the same time, we've also been hearing about some of the tensions that exist between domestic procurement and offshore procurement as well. And of course, the tensions that arise from that with conflicts like Ukraine when timeliness is of utmost importance. I wonder if you could just sort of talk a little bit about the tension between domestic and offshore procurement and where you see Canada going, and whatever you'd like to tell us about that.
Sure. I just wanted to clarify, by offshore you mean international obligations?
I do.
Okay. So essentially, I think this is where the NSE, or the National Security Exception, becomes particularly relevant as part of the discussion, because the NSE, when invoked by the Department of National Defense when doing procurement, it kind of disarms certain obligations under international free trade agreements. It doesn't do something similar with domestic requirements, right? So there are certain requirements that still exist under the GCRs, which is the government contracting regulations. So that's one of the big differences, and that's not the case in the United States. In the United States, what happens with the invocation of the national security exception is it actually disarms both free trade obligations, and equally so creates a disarmament of the national FAR and DFAR.
So just to make sure that we're getting the message that you're sending here, which is the more streamlined approach then, domestic or international?
So what ends up happening is, as a result, you've taken away certain obligations that exist within free trade agreements by the invocation of the national security exception. You don't disarm any obligations under the government contract regulations by the virtue of the application of the NSC. So as a result, the domestic obligations that exist, including competition, still hold true.
Okay, thank you for that. I want to switch to stick with domestic procurement here for a moment then. What advice would you give Canada to address the expectation that these substantial sums of money that are being invested in defense procurement lead to local economic development and job creation? I represent Halifax, so the connection's obvious. Mr. Fisher represents Dartmouth, where some of the kits for ship assembly are being assembled. We're very interested in this topic. How do we reconcile the benefits along with the procurement?
So I know that you've had a number of witnesses who represent industry, and so ultimately each witness represents their own views in terms of fairness, right? And so obviously my office is responsible for promoting fairness more generally and broadly. So what we try to do is essentially ensure that where there are domestic processes that are allowed to seek only Canadian participants, that is seen as a fair process, right? And again, not to reiterate the national security exception, but when the national security exception is invoked, then it does allow for procurements to be limited to domestic capabilities. One thing I will say is it's incredibly important to understand what those domestic capabilities are, because I have heard a number of previous witnesses mentioning the importance of being able to direct contracts, right? And so in order to make those justifications to direct contracts and not compete, you need to be fully aware of what exists in terms of the capabilities of the Canadian supplier.
And so, is it your experience that the Industrial Technological Benefits Program makes your job more difficult or less difficult, or what's your perspective on the whole IDP?
So my perspective is that the program exists, and we've not done, again, I hate to reiterate this point, but we've not done a review, obviously, of that specific program. However, that being said, because the national security exemption allows for this program to exist within all of our respective trade obligations and domestic rules, that there are no issues associated with fairness, right? The other issues raised by other witnesses about the timeliness associated with limiting the pool of available suppliers, that's kind of beyond the purview of fairness from our perspective.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a minute and a half? I'd like to go back to where I began, which was the statement about the committee seeing and hearing about a lot of different procurement processes in different jurisdictions around the world. And, you know, we here in Canada, 3 departments are involved in overseeing a body, various reporting structures that a lot of testimony has indicated add time and confusion and delay and so forth. I don't want to ask you an awkward question, but is there a jurisdiction whose procurement process you admire that you would share with us?
So, again, Mr. Chair, that's a fair question. I don't know that I would express admiration for a foreign jurisdiction's procurement process, but I will say in terms of the process that's established within Canada, I know there's been a lot of discussion about whether, in fact, that needs to be streamlined. And I would say the development of the highest level official with an exclusive mandate on procurement can only be seen as a good thing. Right? And so that is something where the Canadian system is unique in the sense that there are multiple components as part of the system, and that requires triaging, constant triaging, right? And so for procurement messages to bubble to the top, it has to be kind of the hottest issue, and sometimes that doesn't happen, so therefore the voice of procurement matters might not be as timely and instantaneous as perhaps it should be.
Okay, and that, I believe, also...
Pretty well done.
We're done? Okay, we'll leave
Yeah.
it there. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you.
Mr. Madame Normandine, 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Ombudsman, for your presence here. I'd like to hear you speak on a general issue. Very often when we ask questions of the Ombudsman on powers that they have, oftentimes they're going to say that they can only make recommendations and there's no authority to implement real change. Do you feel that you're missing some tools in order to have a more coercive effect
It allows me to speak on one of the issues that we've asked for in terms of regulatory changes. It's not so much the power or the teeth associated with the recommendations, but it's the right to compel documentation from departments. That is something that we have been actively seeking for some time, and we have examples where we know that documentation has not been provided to us upon request. So it takes many iterations to receive the required documentation. In terms of your question specifically about recommendations, I will say that we're pleased to see that our recommendations are traditionally followed in almost all circumstances. On the systemic reviews, I will say that is the benefit of the 2-year follow-up. So we follow up after 2 years to describe whether implementation has been complete on the recommendations that we've made. And so we will be submitting report cards on all 17 departments and agencies that we've reviewed. So you'll be able to get a sense of did they comply with the recommendation in whole, in part, or not at all.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais revenir sur la question des documents.
Thank you. I'd like to come back on documents. So, for example, with regards to mediation, if you have parties that are not pleased with the results, so if I say that generally speaking, it's once a contract is concluded that both parties will have recourse to your mediation services, and there's no true way to correct any harm. Is there any way to act ahead of time?
First part of your question, our mediation is in fact limited to only the administrative component. So once you're in contract administration, so if your complaint is about the award of a contract, we don't have authority to provide ADR services, but we do have other review mechanisms. That being said, our mediation services are incredibly successful. So pre-COVID, where we were doing mediation only in person, we had a 90% success rate in resolving whatever issues arose. And like I said, there are no dollar value thresholds associated with the mediations we can perform. As a result of COVID, we had to pivot slightly and perform online mediation. Our success rate went down slightly because for those of you who have actively participated in mediation, appreciate that there is a benefit to being in person, but we still have a success rate of over 75% conducting mediations online. So where you heard me say it's an underutilized aspect of our mandate, we know that there are significant issues in contract administration across the federal government, and we've been working diligently with departmental heads to make sure that information about our mediation services is proactively disclosed in contracts, that information about the dispute resolution mechanisms that they can seek is in regret letters. So we have actively been working to address any concerns that have been raised about the availability or the usefulness of our services.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I'd like to come back on the issue of documents that you don't always manage in obtaining. Are you provided with reasons as to why documents might not be provided, for example, from the Department of Defense? Or are these requests made and then that they remain unanswered?
To the Department of National Defense, we undertook this review pretty much during the height of COVID. And so D&D was predominantly a paper-based department. So as a result, there were certain buildings that were closed to them. So it took time for them to identify documentation. That being said, COVID alone was not an excuse for what we saw. We saw documentation issues beyond what COVID would explain away. But to answer your question directly, for the most part, additional requests did go answered, but you have to understand that we have a limited time to do our review. And so by asking over several months, it really impacted our ability to analyze the new documentation that was provided. So in a way, there is an impact.
Donc, juste pour être sûr que
So to make sure that I've understood correctly, so once you've requested a document, then when it's provided, it's not always sufficient. If there's a huge delay, this can be a dilatory measure in order to hinder the work.
Merci. J'aimerais vous entendre sur
I'd like to hear you speak. An example, for example, we saw with the commemorative monument for veterans of from Afghanistan, there was a competition, and the business that was awarded the contract saw the contract withdrawn afterwards, and the decision seemed to come not from the department but from the PMO. Is this something that concerns you? The fact that there can be a form of influence from the Prime Minister, and in some cases we might not even know.
really believe in segregation between the political arm and the procurement process. So there really should be no intervention from political actors whatsoever in procurement-related decisions. Specific to the reviews that we undertook, we did have a specific case within our procurement practice review where there were issues associated with the kind of conversion of Leopard-style vehicles as monuments. We did see that that contract was inappropriately awarded because the bid was no longer valid at the time the contract was entered into. So the bid validity period was 90 days and the contract was actually awarded after 187 days, and there was no extension in the bid validity period.
Mr. Angus, you have 6 minutes. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'm so pleased to be here, and I'm very pleased to be able to ask you some important questions. A major European tank war wasn't on anybody's bingo card 2 years ago. Now we're coming into the second winter in the war in Ukraine. It has caused a massive pivot internationally for supplies, from everything from artillery shells to winter coats to boots, hats, everything that's needed. Has this put more pressure on your department in terms, or your office, in terms of being able to assess fairness in procurement for what Canada is supplying to the Ukrainian war effort?
So specific to Ukraine, we haven't seen an inordinate jump in complaints to our office. However, during the COVID period, because of the application of the national security exception, we did see a spike in complaints to our office. Specifically to contributions being made to Ukraine, we have not seen a noticeable spike in complaints to our office about those issues specifically.
Okay, thank you very much for that. The sexual harassment scandal certainly rocked and caused a lot of trauma, both for the Canadian public's confidence and for those men and women serving. And the Department of National Defense at the time said that they would hire a team of experts in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that turned out to be McKinsey, who have their own deeply troubled past. And so many questions were raised about why they were given that position. Now, I understand you were tasked to look into PSPC's relationship with McKinsey. Can you tell us what you found?
So I would love to be able to tell you, but unfortunately that review is not yet complete, but it is scheduled to be complete in a relatively short time frame. So we're anticipating in early 2024.
We look forward to that report. I think the thing that concerned us as New Democrats is, in a previous annual report, you identified that more than half of the competitive solicitation processes result in a single bidder. If we're talking about certain kinds of rockets that have to be put on ships, that may make sense. But is this across the board? And if so, what does this tell us about the defense procurement that's specifically taking place in terms of barriers to meaningful competition? What are you seeing?
So that's a great question. Thank you for reading our annual report. I think there are some really important pieces of information in the annual report. You cite that figure of 34%. So that's 34% of times where competitive processes are run, you only have one bidder. So you're not benefiting at all from diverse solutions, competitive pricing. And so all of that energy is going for naught. So it really is a good question to unpackage why that's happening. Some of the reasons we've heard are the ultimate sophistication and difficulty of gaining entry to federal procurement in general. And there's also real issues about incumbent advantage. So one of the questions that's asked typically in a procurement process, is there an incumbent currently providing the goods or services? And if the answer is yes, it seems to suppress any other willing bidders to step forward, right? And so the question is, how can we dilute incumbent advantage more to encourage more people to participate in these competitive processes?
That's very interesting, because we have heard through this study calls for cutting red tape on defense procurement and loosening rules around sole source. For me, that's always a red flag for boondoggle down the road. Can you offer thoughts on safeguards that you think should be in place for defense procurement that we would need to make sure, in terms of making sure that if we're going to cut red tape, are we going to make sure that small and medium size and other businesses are able to compete fairly, and this isn't just going to the powerful and the insiders?
Yeah, absolutely. So transparency is kind of the offset to the risk that you've identified. So that's where documentation matters. So I answered a previous question about documentation, but it's incredibly important as you make decisions throughout the process that you document these decisions. So if you make a decision that there is the rightful application of an exception to competitive procurement, in many instances that may be accurate. However, if you don't document those reasons, it's very difficult to know why a contract has been directed. So I can't underscore enough the need to document all decisions associated with procurement processes, and then make transparent the outcomes, right? If the Canadian public no longer trust in the federal procurement system, we all lose out, right? And that's something that I've emphasized in our most recent annual report, is that I do feel like there is a risk as a result of a general lack of transparency. Now, the final thing I'll say is just on the national security exception, there is obviously inhibitors to transparency associated with the invocation. Sometimes rightfully, but other times when there's a blanket application of the national security exception, it might do more harm than good in terms of creating a belief that things aren't being done appropriately. So transparency is the offset to some of the risks that you presented in your question.
I have about 30
Okay,
seconds.
so in my final few seconds, the need for you to have the power to compel documentation, you don't have that. But if you did, that would be certainly something that would aid in your work.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Mr. Kelly, 5 minutes.
Thank you. And thank you for the important accountability work that you do for Canadians. You mentioned in your opening statements that you have requested sufficient budget resources to be able to continue to do proactive reviews, but you cannot. And that budget request has been refused. So for the record, this means that you do not have the resources to do proactive reviews. You can only investigate complaints.
I would say at this time, so it's not that we don't have resources to do any systemic reviews, but we don't have the resources to do the volume of systemic reviews that we should.
Okay, but the point of systemic review or proactive review is to ensure best practice.
Absolutely.
And so that work cannot, you don't have, your office doesn't have the budget to do that now.
Absolutely. And just, if I may, on your point, so the reason we do knowledge pieces is to create reasonable grounds to actually do these systemic investigations. So if we don't have the resources to launch knowledge pieces, we might not know where problems lie. So we're very reliant on the stakeholders that work with our office to disclose information to let us know where to go.
Thank you. Now, you mentioned that the departments refuse your requests for information. That's troubling. Is that's during a proactive review or a complaint review or either?
So I wouldn't use the terminology that they refuse document production, but they're unable to produce documentation in certain circumstances. And in other circumstances, the documentation that's provided is not fulsome. And
okay, I thought you said that you had to go back and re-ask and re-ask and re-ask.
So there is that, and it stemmed from the question about the establishment of the electronic database. And so the database was not capturing information accurately. So as a result, what was scoped in were not relevant contracts for us to actually review. So we would have to go back to the department and ask them to reproduce relevant documentation. So it's not a refusal to provide the documentation, it's an inability to provide accurate information.
So the third recommendation in your report, you talked about that DN needed to update its procedural policies and training to require all evaluators to assess and confirm that they're not in a conflict of interest. I would hope that this really would go without saying. Is your office concerned that conflicts of interest exist with evaluators?
So the issue is that if you're external to government, those evaluators are actively signing new conflict of interest declarations, right? So it's top of mind right before conducting an evaluation. That same process isn't true if you're a member or an employee of the Department of National Defense. And so as a result, we want it to be top of mind for all evaluators so that on those procurements where you're not doing a blind evaluation and you actually know who ultimately the bidders are, you need to be mindful mindful of the fact that conflict is at the top of the priorities in terms of having an effective and fair evaluation process.
Okay. When you have found improper bids have been awarded, who signs off on these bids? Is it DND, Treasury Board, PSPC, or is the complicated relationship of all three part of the root of how improper bids are awarded?
So for the purposes of our systemic review, all of those contracts would have been awarded by the Department of National Defense. So that's how we scoped it, in that they're both the contracting authority and also the ultimate recipient.
Okay, so that's your earlier comment that is on, it's on D&D when there's
Absolutely.
an inappropriate bid. Okay. We heard this morning about the acquisition of Reaper drones being delayed 3 more years. Can you comment on factors that, I mean, we're 22 years now after the timeline that was when this piece of equipment was identified as one that the Canadian Forces needed. What factors can lead to that kind of unacceptable delay in procurement?
So, Mr. Chair, unfortunately, I can't comment on this specific circumstance. However, if given the opportunity, I have some ideas as to how the procurement process can be improved in general.
Okay, go ahead right now.
Okay. So the first thing I would say is publish an accurate, transparent project pipeline for non-NSC projects, so a refreshed version of the Defense Investment Plan that can be relied upon and trusted by industry. Second is include full life cycle planning and solicitations and contracts addressing obsolescence and interoperability. Number 3, apply a risk-based approach to all defense projects, increasing delegations. I know that, okay, sorry.
Yeah, I know.
Chair.
That was good stuff.
It was very good stuff,
that's
and I'm
pretty
sure he'll
important to our
work it
study.
into another answer from Mr. Collins or someone else. 5 minutes.
Continue, sir.
Perfect. I appreciate that.
There
Thank you,
go.
Mr. Chair.
Cooperation.
I would say embed a TB analyst as part of the major projects procurement teams, raising any issues in real time and reduce TB sub requirements. Payment of bid costs for compliant bidder, or payment of partial bid costs for compliant bidders for major projects. So that goes to address some of the things we were talking about before, about the 34% of competitive processes only having a single bidder. Create clear accountabilities between all of the respective actors, which we know is a complicated system. Reduce the number of mandatory criteria to only those that are essential. So we see that as mandatories being overly restrictive, again, creating a smaller pool of available bidders. Use accepted exceptions to competition where appropriate. Do not make decisions in fear of litigation and allow the dispute resolution mechanisms to play their roles. So you heard me mention use the CITT appropriately. Mimic what worked during times of emergency procurement, centralization versus regional procurement, increased delegations. So here's another area where our office can be particularly relevant. So use a hackathon-style event, and hackathon's a term my children use. I'm not sure I'm using it appropriately, but I'm pretty sure I am, to bring together all the actors. So you've brought forward many witnesses before you, each of which has their own incentives for being here. Bring all of those actors together over a weekend to address critical issues. Those are the types of things that were done during a time of emergency. Defense procurement requires something similar. Prioritize the creation of a government-wide vendor performance regime. Now, again, I can't underscore this enough. We do not have a government-wide vendor performance regime. We want to work with the best suppliers possible. You do not want to use the award process as a mechanism to avoid dealing with poor suppliers. The award process was not designed to play that role. We need a vendor performance mechanism that will reward good performers and not reward poor performers. And it can't be limited to a single department. It has to be more appropriate across the board. Engage industry in non-project specific discussions, including capacity and Canada assessments. So we had a previous question about Canadian capacity. I think it's really important to have frank dialogues about what is possible with Canadian industry currently and what's possible in the future. That's why having that trusted pipeline of projects is so important. I heard industry say that they want contracts in hand. If you have a trusted pipeline that you can rely on, that may actually meet that need. again, a question about best practices in foreign jurisdictions. So that's something that you need to continually refresh yourself on. There are other allies who are working diligently to ensure defense procurement is working as efficiently as it can within their countries, getting timely information from our allies. Require multiple procurement-related courses for RMC graduates. So this is my global theme. If I could have one global theme as the takeaway message, is that we need to recruit we need to recruit and invest time in those recruits coming out of university now. And the reason for that is I actually heard D&D say that it's a 9-year incubation period to be able to work on complex projects as a PG, right? That's an incredibly long period of time. So if we invested more time and effort in university-related programs that could have sophisticated, complex defense-related procurement as their focus of study, we know there are jobs that exist, right? So the question is creating more of these programs. There is a program like that exists at the University of Ottawa that's run by the Telfair program, but there needs to be more of them, right? And that's the issue. It cannot be isolated to one program. And I know traditionally, again, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I believe we were sending people to participate in programs in Australia. We need to garner these programs in Canada and establish them. And on RMC specifically, procurement ultimately impacts everyone. So having every graduate coming out of RMC have not just a basic introductory course on procurement, but actually an advanced knowledge of procurement will help them regardless of what stream they pursue at the RMC. So greatly appreciate the opportunity to present you with that list, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Thank you, Mr. I think we just had our report written for us.
That's it.
Got his passion, didn't he?
Yeah. Thank you for that, Mr. Yeagle. That was very helpful. Madame Normandine, 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I'd like to come back on justification when we decide on a sole provider. Even if you're making recommendations saying that sometimes there are reasons why there is a sole provider contract awarded, it usually would be on a good faith basis. Is there a legislative way or any other way to make sure that reasons have to be provided when there's a sole source?
In terms of justification for sole sourcing, I think it is very important to highlight the need to have robust justifications and make those justifications transparent, right? And I think that if that were happening, I think the veil of secrecy that's associated sometimes with some of these directed contracts would be lifted, right? And so again, make transparent exactly why there is perhaps only one supplier that's available, or what is the public policy that dictates that it's in the public's interest to direct a contract. We're coming out of a time during COVID where the emergency exception was utilized for a wide variety of procurements. So directly about your question, what safeguards, legal safeguards could we implement, and we could make sure that all departments have robust justifications for the invocation of these exceptions. That being said, these exceptions are actually part of the regulation. So I don't want to give the impression that exercising an exception is somehow wrongful. It is not, right? And there are absolutely reasons why you should use those exceptions. But the problem lies in the justification and the transparency of that justification.
Merci. Et justement, qui...
Thank you. So who would be the person or the entity best placed to examine to see if the justification is sufficient or not?
National. So where you heard me draw reference to the United States about how they go about invoking the national security exception and what that means domestically for them, they actually allow for additional oversight from the GAO. So the GAO is the entity within the United States that could go in and actually verify the justifications in place for directing some of these procurements. In Canada, it's not as clear, right? So the CITT does not have the authority to review the justification, perhaps, of the invocation of the national security exception, which in and of itself is not a justification to direct a contract, but sometimes forms part of the analysis that underpins why that contract might in fact be directed. Thank you.
Mr. Angus, 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I represent people in James Bay and the lower part of Hudson Bay, and there's really still very bad memories of when the Mid-Canada line was put in. All the contractors came up, the military came up, and they left massive environmental damage. We're now looking at the NORAD modernization in Nunavut, and the chance of northern communities being able to participate, northern businesses, they're going to face a number of difficulties. So in order to make sure that this is just not another exercise in Canadian northern colonialism, what steps need to be taken to ensure that northern communities in that region are able to financially benefit and participate in the investment that's going on?
Mr. Chair, that's a good question. So ultimately, there should be provisions in the contract that need to be enforced, and it's just a question of enforcing those provisions. So ensure that those provisions exist, making sure that those investments are in fact made, and then there has to be enforcement of those provisions.
Have you looked at any of the barriers? I mean, these are enormous barriers that we're finding in the far north. We find it with big mining projects too, that the whole system is set up that fundamentally excludes the First Peoples whose land it is. Have you looked at any of this? Have you been able to provide any ideas in order to make sure we are not dealing with this as a problem down the road, but we deal with it before it happens?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are in touch, obviously, with issues associated with Indigenous suppliers. There are new requirements under the Directive of Management and Procurement, which require a 5% allocation of federal contracts to be awarded to Indigenous suppliers. So it's really important to note that that is a certain, I don't want to call it progress, but it's a certain requirement that's now established. So part of our role can be ensuring accountability that in fact is happening. So as an office, that is where we can play an active role.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Angus. Madame Kraft-Nyman.
I'm going to pass my time to James Bazan.
Mr. Bazan, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the Ombudsman coming in, and I appreciate all the recommendations. That does make our task a lot simpler for us, especially when we start looking at defense procurement. And my understanding, your study, as you just said, only concentrated on the ones that national defense had final authority on. So I'm anticipating you didn't look at some of the great big contracts like shipbuilding and fighter jets and others that are involved at 3 or 4 different departmental levels. And so your recommendations along the line of what we can do to streamline that process between National Defence, Procurement Canada, and Treasury Board. Now, you mentioned that, well, first of all, I find it striking in your report to National Defence. You make your recommendations. And unlike what I've seen in responses from the department back to the Auditor General or to the Defence Ombudsman, is that they either accept or reject the recommendation. In almost every one of yours, it starts the same way. Well, it's almost identical response. We will review our processes, and we'll look at the management action plan. Are you satisfied that that's good enough to deal with the recommendations that you made in your Ombudsman report?
So we also did note, obviously, that there was a certain repetition in the responses that we got from the department. However, I think it would be a bit premature because we do have a follow-up mechanism. So the department did actually write to me providing an update at the end of September. But our evaluation of the implementation of these recommendations will only happen in our follow-up review, which should be in early 2024.
Okay. Can you share the response that National Defence sent to you on kind of an interim report on what they are doing in response to your recommendations?
Sure. I would just need to check with the Department of National Defence before tabling that because it's still in draft phase, but I could certainly endeavor to look into whether I can table that with the committee.
Because I think it is timely and important for our study on defence procurement if we have that type of input. Now, you said in your opening comment and also in response to questions about the issue of incorrectly awarded contracts. Now, you had that one example, but there was 19, I think you said, that were inappropriately contracted or awarded. Is it because of cost, or does it cost the taxpayer more because they were incorrectly awarded?
So I'll just clarify. So what happened is, this is under the third line of inquiry that deals with evaluation and contract award. And so in 10 instances, we did not have sufficient evaluation information to determine whether, in fact, the contract had been rightfully awarded, right? If you don't know what the individual evaluators did and you don't know what the consensus evaluation is, it's difficult to say that the contract was rightfully awarded. And then in other circumstances, we found, like the example I gave with the Leopard conversion into monuments, where the bid validity period had expired. There are other examples. I could give one where there was a requirement for educational background and the resource did not have the required educational background to meet the mandatory criteria. So by definition, if you didn't meet the mandatory criteria, then it's a wrongful award of contract.
So in your evaluation of national defense procurement, did you come across any circumstances or situations where kit was bought or defense material and equipment was bought that was inappropriate for the original ask from the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces?
Yeah, so I do think it's important to clarify. So under the purposes of our review, there were not many pieces of the procurement file that we looked at that actually involved defense-related goods or services, right? So as a result, traditionally these are contracts less than $5 million, but still that's where D&D would have their own contracting authority. And so I'm not trying to skirt the question, I'm just simply trying to explain why we reviewed D&D the way we did, because we reviewed all 17 departments and agencies in the same manner, using the same methodology. However, it goes back to the question of funding. If we did have additional funding, we would have the ability to pursue perhaps larger engagements that could include the defense side of the procurement realm.
And you would be able to do that analysis based upon the entire gamut of how procurement happens, involving the entire scope of the whole government of Canada.
Yes, so that was the background or underpinning rationale for why we pursued this 5-year systemic review plan.
Okay, and we found this morning, we heard that the Public Accounts Committee report came.
It's all right. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but you're done. Mr. Fisher, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the Ombudsman for being here today. My riding of Dartmouth-Cole Harbour has many defense-related companies, from startups right to huge defense contractors. These smaller companies are innovating some really, really, really brilliant tech. And as they're scaling up, of course, they're looking to hopefully bid on some Canadian contracts. From the issues that you've audited or investigated, what could we specifically do as a government to streamline and make it simpler to help these smaller companies take part in the Canadian government procurement process?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. So a large portion of our stakeholders are, in fact, small and medium-sized businesses, and you'll hear me talk about overly restrictive criteria, right? So if you have criteria that require a certain size of company to be able to participate, obviously it makes it more difficult for small and medium-sized businesses. Also, payment terms. People don't appreciate how payment terms impact small and medium-sized businesses differently than they do for other large suppliers. So what we always recommend, and again, I shouldn't use the word recommend, but what we suggest is that they participate in the supply chain differently to start, right? So to take that to take the opportunity to be a subcontractor in larger projects, to gain that experience on federal contracts, so that any mistakes that are made, that they don't bear the financial burden associated with it, but yet they're learning lessons, they're gaining valuable experience, and through that, they'll be able to naturally grow. So that's typically the advice that we would provide small and medium-sized businesses that yet haven't entered the federal procurement supply chain.
Interesting you talk about the payments. You know, a new business would presumably need to have that money in 30 days or so, and government probably is 60, 90, 120.
Absolutely. So you'll notice one of our knowledge deepening and sharing pieces was about late payments and how it means different things to different people. So on the government side, there is defined definitions as to what late payment means. But if you're a small or medium-sized business, you're perceiving that payment will be made after delivery of the good or service within 30 days. But sometimes there's a disconnect. So that's really why we wrote that piece, so that there's an appreciation of the various kind of responsibilities within the transaction.
I get the sense that we are pretty good at the little things when it comes to procurement, but we struggle when we get to the really, really big things. How do we take what we've learned or take what we know on smaller procurement and apply it to the bigger projects?
So the bad news answer is that I wouldn't suggest that what you said to be accurate for this specific purpose, in the sense that we did see identifiable issues in relatively small scale procurement. So there are certainly lessons to be learned, and there are certain departments who are particularly good at certain things. The IRCC, for example, has excellent documentation protocols that could be mimicked. The RCMP also has certain oversight functionality of aspects of their procurement processes that catch some of these errors early on. So it's this dangerous kind of question of, how much oversight is enough, but not so much so that it creates an additional burden. And so I did hear previous witnesses talking about the risk-based approach. I strongly believe that that is the right mechanism to continue to pursue with defense procurement. The one thing I will soften is the list that I did read. I have to be careful that those are my ideas, not my recommendations, because I did not do a review of defense procurement. Those are ideas that I've had, that I've brought forward from other reviews that I've done that I think could be useful as you study defense procurement.
You mentioned the national security exception with the states, and they can invoke that at certain. Does that cause any issues with regards to general procurement in the states? When the Americans want to qualify for overseas contracts as well, but if they keep it in-house, then other countries may be reciprocal. Did you see that happening?
So because my jurisdiction is limited to Canada, I can't speak to the international angle. I mean, I have previous life experiences in the United States, but I wouldn't want to draw parallels to what I saw previously to what I do as my current role.
So if we were to do something similar to the national security exception, do you see that causing a problem with our general procurement roles when Canadian companies are trying to get contracts in other countries?
So what I would say about the United States is there's an offset, right? So what the NSC does in the United States also triggers enhanced oversight by the GAO. And so if we were to try something similar, the General Accountability Office. So if we were to do something similar or even propose something similar in Canada, we would need to then determine who would be the overseer of the appropriate invocation or disarmament of the obligations at the national level.
Thank you.
And Mr. Yagelich, I want to thank you on behalf of the committee. Your testimony has been highly stimulating, and while I know you're not saying these are recommendations, they're ideas. You can't have a recommendation until you have an idea in the first place. So we appreciate your ideas, and hopefully I'm suspecting that somehow or another this testimony is going to be featured in our report, because you've been very helpful, and I appreciate you not only staying in your remit, but also going beyond your remit with some very useful and helpful ideas. So with that, colleagues, again, thank you. We'll suspend while we re-empanel. Thank you. We have two witnesses with us today. Alexis Ross, President of Apex Defense Strategies, and Professor Trevor Taylor, Director, Defense Industries and Society Program, Royal United Services Institute. Both of you have been briefed, and so we'll ask you for your opening 5-minute statements, starting with Alexis Ross. Welcome to the committee. You're muted.
You're muted.
There you go.
Thank you.
Okay, start
All right.
over again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to inform the committee's deliberations on the committee's deliberations by offering comparative insights from the U.S. experience with procurement. My name is Alexis LaSalle Ross, and while I currently own a consulting business that advises companies as they navigate the defense market, I've spent 20 years in government working on national security policy. During my time in Congress and the Department of Defense, I spent several years instituting reform in government programs, most recently in defense acquisition. As a congressional staffer, I wrote legislation to change the focus and outcomes in weapons procurement. I continued this work in the Army as the presidentially appointed Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Strategy and Acquisition Reform, where I worked to change the policies, processes, and responsibilities in the Army's acquisition enterprise. Through these experiences, I have gained an understanding of the necessity, the obstacles, and the benefits of acquisition reform. It is my honor to appear today before the committee and offer my observations on the procurement process. And while I cannot speak to the Canadian procurement system or its impact on the Canadian Armed Forces, I can explain the American experience in weapons acquisition and our attempts to reform our own defense acquisition system to yield better outcomes for our military forces. There are several well-cited pitfalls of the U.S. defense acquisition system. For example, it can take 10 or more years to field a major weapon system, and the DoD's procurement processes typically do not adapt quickly to emerging threats or evolving technologies. Consequently, there have been dozens of initiatives to reform acquisition policies, processes, and organizational structure over the last 50 years. Every several years, a surge of interest and activity emerges that leads to notable changes. As in every kind of public policy debate, there is a proverbial pendulum that swings between what is important or which side of the debate triumphs. So in acquisition reform, the pendulum usually swings between optimizing cost, schedule, and performance when procuring weapon systems. Currently, the American defense system is in an era that promotes speed and innovation. Starting in roughly 2015, we've undertaken structural changes, such as the realignment of decision-making authority to accelerate the pace of programs advancement through the process. We've made procedural changes, including creating new pathways in the process that eliminated some of the procedural requirements for programs and sped their progress. We've expanded the use of the more flexible and therefore more rapid contracting methods. Now, with regard to innovation, we've taken steps to attract non-traditional vendors into the defense market, such as the technology companies from the Silicon Valley Tech Hub here in California. This has consisted of the creation of organizations designed to perform outreach to and guide these non-traditional vendors as they enter the defense market. We've also created special authorities to incentivize the acquisition workforce to utilize these new non-traditional entrants. So in closing, there are 3 considerations I would offer to anyone undertaking acquisition reform. First, any major reform effort must be bolstered by a sound implementation plan. Reform is really just a good idea until it's been implemented, and the majority of the work occurs when the changes are executed and the system adapts to the new paradigm. So it entails really changes in the organization's culture, which takes, of course, a lot of time. So it's definitely worth being prepared for a long endeavor. Next, the extent of success of acquisition reform is really inherently limited by the faults of adjacent systems that impact acquisition outcomes. For the U.S., these are the requirement systems that determines what to buy and the budgeting system that resources the procurement. After a few years of designing and then implementing acquisition reform in both Congress and the Department of Defense, I came to the conclusion that acquisition could not go any faster without changes to the budgeting process, which is another rigid, slow, and overly prescribed process. Finally, one must anticipate a change in focus in the near future. Just when you feel the previous changes are taking hold, something will inevitably happen, such as a sudden involvement in military operations that shifts priorities, or a change in the political party in power. And again, with these, the focus shifts to a new priority. And as I said before, in acquisition, it usually means shifting the priority between optimizing cost, schedule, or performance. So I applaud the committee for its interest in improving the Canadian procurement system, and I hope that my testimony proves useful to that endeavor. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. Professor Taylor, 5 minutes, please. Muted, sir. You're still muted. Professor Taylor, you're muted, unfortunately. Can you just press the that?
Yeah, no,
Good.
that's fine. It wasn't. I was muted, and now I've been unmuted. The same as Dr. Ross. Well, thank you. Yes, it's an interesting challenge to be asked to talk to you this evening for me. Obviously, afternoon for you. What I would like to say first of all is that I observe that Canada, like Australia and the United States, and certainly the United Kingdom, have a kind of constant effort to improve their acquisition system. This is to be applauded, but it does say something about how difficult it is actually to get everything right. One of the conclusions I reached quite a while ago was that, and it relates to something with your last speaker, is that different things have to be bought in different ways, have to be procured in different ways, and need different acquisition strategies to deal with them. And that's quite a complex challenge to specify it, but you don't buy office desks in the way that you buy combat aircraft, and it builds on that. So well done to Canada for trying to make things better, but you're in a club where defense acquisition is a soap opera rather than a novel with an ending. One of the things, I'm not going to talk too much about the British acquisition system. I'm happy to take questions on it. But I did put some written paper to you, and I'll just underline the sort of headlines from that. One is that there's a role, I think, for expectation management. People have extraordinary expectations that defense equipment can be delivered in 10 years' time to a particular performance for a particular amount of money. On the way here, I just tested my views with a cab driver, and he said, I asked him if he'd had any work done on his house, and he'd had various jobs, including a new bathroom. And I said, was it on time? And he said, no, it took 10 days, not 5. And I said, did you write to your minister? And he said, no. But when our equipment is, a year or so late on a 10-year program, we've got to appreciate how difficult these things. So I think there's a role for expectation management. I think there's a fundamental challenge now to defense acquisition at the high level, and I will put it in these terms. We're accustomed to defense acquisition processes being very deliberate and careful, and there's a kind of formal way through where you specify a requirement, and then you think of an acquisition strategy, and then you go and implement it. And eventually you sign a contract and all that. And it takes a long time, as everybody in this business knows. The reality of the world in which we are living now is that technology is moving very quickly in many important areas, and world politics is moving very quickly in important areas. So the idea that you can write a really useful requirement now against which you'll sign a contract in 4 years' time seems absolutely ludicrous. And the way in which it's moving reluctantly, I must say, in the UK, in some parts, at least the UK, is that there's need for a closer dialogue between industry, who know more about the technology, and the government, who know more about needs. And they talk together, and the relationship between them becomes more important than the contract that may exist. Now, it's a big and radical way of moving, but when you think at the speed at which it's the sort of way in which we operate with urgent operational requirements, but it's not the sort of way in which we usually work with major platforms. But I think there's a real challenge for defense acquisition in ambitious countries to say how do they make their acquisition system move at the same rate as technology and politics are moving. Now, I know that Canada's trying to go quicker with acquisition processes, but so there's awareness of this. But I think, one particular point is if you go for fixed requirements, then those requirements are going to become unsatisfactory to your military users before you've had a chance to deliver the system, and that means contract changes and all that. The second feature of the next point I wanted to make was that Canada does not, and nor does the United Kingdom, buy military equipment to achieve a single objective of military capability. It's going for prosperity. It's going for improving, wealth distribution within the country. It's in the UK's case, it's trying to keep the union together, help cement the union. So we place work in Scotland that helps to do that because it binds the Scots closer together. So we have procurement for multiple objectives. We have quite debates now about what are the dimensions of value, because it's much more than whether a general in a division thinks it's a very good piece of kit. That's an important consideration, but it's not the only consideration. Foreign policy considerations can also feed in.
Professor Taylor, you're a fair bit past your time already. I wonder whether you could work the rest of your comments into responses to members' questions.
Okay, that's fine with me. That makes my life easier here.
Okay, we're all about trying to make your life easier. There we are. Mr. Bazan, 5 minutes, 6 minutes.
6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for taking time out of their schedules to join us here virtually in Canada as we're looking at ways to improve defense procurement here. Professor Taylor, at RUSI, have you guys ever done any studies on the Canadian Armed Forces? Any of your colleagues?
Not to my knowledge. We have a separate group that do, if you like, the operational side of the military, or a military sciences part. I'm sort of aware of things like, because I deal with procurement with things like your vessel, but your new ship, but Type 26 variant. But I don't know of any studies, but we've been in existence since 1831. So when you ask me, have we ever, I can't give you a clear answer.
Quite a while from reading through your bio. So, okay, so I just, and I do want to drill down on the issue, and you kind of touched on it, Professor Taylor, and I know that Dr. Ross is incredibly experienced on this, her time at the Pentagon and on Capitol Hill. What's the importance from a national defense perspective of having the indigenous capabilities of domestic production of your versus having to rely on international partners, especially when you look at the great power struggles that we're seeing today, war in Ukraine, war in Israel with the terrorist attack by Hamas, ongoing conflict raging in the South China Sea between China and the Philippines, never mind over the Strait of Taiwan with the independent island of Taiwan and the PRC. So just wondering the importance of having those defense industry capabilities domestically.
Well, I think the quick answer is very important, but it's not absolutely important. The UK wants to present itself as a operationally independent major international power, and they recognize that means that you cannot depend entirely or excessively on a foreign supplier. And I think Ukraine's brought out, the importance of supply chains in defense capability. There are a variety of reasons for this, but which are somewhat in part to do with prosperity and these other things. But there is government documentation particularly the Defence and Security Industrial Strategy, which was announced in 2021, which explained why the government had concluded that this was important, what they were going to try and maintain. And then we have quite a series of sector strategies. I think it's very much down to, there was a document in 2012 which said the ability to use your armed forces as you see fit is the essence of sovereignty. Now that that raises all kinds of questions about what sovereignty means, but it says it's something quite important. And if
Dr. Ross,
jump
in on this, because Dr. Ross, you kind of alluded to this and trying to bring in some of the non-traditional players into the defense industry and defense procurement in the United States, specifically on cyber and new digital technologies. But the importance of it, I know in the United States you guys are by far the most capable in defense production in the Western world. So just wanted to get your comments on that. And also, because of your experience on Capitol Hill, we did see U.S. Media comment that Canada has become a laggard as in meeting the NATO 2% mark. And we had Senator Dan Sullivan at committee also talk about Canada not pulling its weight, and was quite critical of our Prime Minister. Just was wondering if you'd be able to comment to that.
So I'll take the first question first. And it's a very good question, Mr. Bazan. I think that there is a great importance that we place, especially currently, on domestic manufacturing. Starting in the 90s, we made some choices. These were choices that were made by the Defense Department and others that essentially amounted to exporting quite a lot of our production, and our domestic manufacturing facilities and capabilities, and therefore workforce, dramatically dwindled in the ensuing decades. And here today, we find ourselves in a situation where much of what we are needing for things such as the material that we're supplying to Ukraine, we found that some of these things we did not have a strong industrial base for them here in the U.S. And so to ramp up production on something that had been turned off or torn down is a very big challenge to do. Industry cannot turn on a dime. Starting a production capability up, a facility up, can take 18 months to 2 years. And so we're finding that we're now having to take steps to try to reverse those trends. And in some cases, it may not be entirely practical to do everything in the U.S. soil. So, of course, we have to rely on, nearshoring or friendshoring, these other concepts of working with allies and partners, which also has additional benefits of working together with a common goal and ultimately having greater interoperability of our systems and other things. So there's great opportunity for that. And to your point about my opening comments, the trying to seek innovation domestically where it exists. I think us, and I would presume that Canada and UK and others are finding that one of our greatest strengths in the Western world is that we have incredible innovation and engineering and a lot of scientists and tech talent that we need to leverage. And we're attempting to do that now. When we look at near-peer adversaries, we're seeing that they don't have quite that talent, and so we need to make sure we leverage this while we can before those other forces do catch up.
Unfortunately, Dr. Taylor, we're going to have to leave it there because Mr. Bazan's time is well past. With that, Madame Lambropoulos, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank both of our witnesses for being here to answer some of our questions. Professor Taylor, I've done a quick reading on some of what you've already written and sent in to the Defence Committee at the UK Parliament. And it seems that your views on competition may not be so clear-cut. I'm wondering if you can explain the pros and cons and go into how we can perhaps promote healthy competition within our own industry, but at the same time kind of cut back on some of the cons.
If you the word limit, that's a real big question, by the way, and a difficult question. But I think the quick observation I would make is if you have a small number of suppliers and a customer that makes only very occasional orders, so those suppliers are desperate to win an order. When you come to a competition, they quite frequently make offers that are, let's say, highly optimistic. And then it's not surprising that they come in late and over budget. It's not surprising that if the government wants to change a contract term, maybe change a requirement, that the companies that have got the contract charge what seems like excessively for it because they know they're in difficulty with the contract in the first place. So I think you have to think about the effects of competition on the offers that companies make. Now, if you're in a market where there are multiple suppliers and multiple customers, competition works much better. But if you're in a competition where losing that competition could mean you leave the sector, then you are not going to give, you're going to be drawn to extremely optimistic answers. And I think we can see this in the way that lots of competitions have run. If I use Dr. Ross's country, the competition between Airbus and Boeing for the US tanker has left Boeing with losses in the billions. Because of the price that they committed to. So I think and you have to think of using competition when the market structures are right.
Okay, thank you for that. And I also recognize that you have experience with the procurement process in the UK. I know that you've also compared it to that of the US. You mentioned Australia, and you have some experience in the European system as well. Can you draw on some of the strengths and what you've seen as best practices that you think Canada can benefit from? And once you're done, I'll pass the baton to Ms. Dr. Ross as well so that she can give us her input there.
Well, I won't hesitate to sort of recommend to another country in different circumstances. But I think I'd go back to my comment in the first very beginning that thinking about buying different things in different ways, which we practice very heavily in the United Kingdom, but without doing it explicitly. So for our next combat aircraft, the global, the GCAP, which we're doing with Japan and Italy, the companies are chosen, the partners are chosen, the partner countries, and they're working as one team to develop what they know must be a competitive product, because the competition comes not from within the sort of top companies, but it comes from having to compete against, in the future, China being in the export market, whatever the US has to offer, and so on. That's, it's a once in 30 contract where there's a very small number of companies that are going to do it. Other areas, so if you're buying rifles, sort of, a traditional open competition will work perfectly effectively because there's lots of people who sell them to you. You don't have a big through life update costs, obsolescent management costs, and so on. So you have to think through whether you've got the right acquisition process for the thing that you're buying, the particular thing that you're buying. And this is a hard thing for commercial officers within defense to get a grip of, because what worked in one area, what is suitable in one area may not be suitable elsewhere.
Thank you.
That's a very limited answer, but I hope I did my best in the period allowed.
Thank you. And I don't know if there's much time left, but Dr. Ross, if you'd like to chime in as well.
About a minute.
All right, I'll be very brief and offer just one thought. I don't know that there are, without knowing the other country systems, I don't know if there, by comparison, if there are things that work well here that should be in place there. What I can do, though, is suggest that there's something that doesn't work well in our system that I would suggest you try to avoid. Much of what our system is very statutory based. It's highly technical. Much of the rules are based in procurement law. Every time something goes wrong, Congress writes a new law. So our rules, you could think of it as barnacles on a ship. They keep getting added to, never get taken away from. If you look at our United States Code, it's like a graveyard of past acquisition mistakes. The only problem with that is it's much to keep up with. It makes it very technical and hard for the workforce to adapt to and actually keep up with. So we have to have a very professional acquisition core, which requires a lot of training and makes it very hard for them to be creative and dynamic and agile. So our greatest success in recent reforms have been finding pathways that just try to streamline this.
I think we might have lost.
You just froze, Dr. Ross. And you're still frozen. Well, she was pretty well at the end in any event. Yes. I don't know whether she's still with us or not, but Ms. Normandin has got the next 6 minutes, but Dr. Ross, you froze for a second there, and so it was pretty well at the end of the 6 minutes regardless, but we were just contemplating barnacles here. So I'm going to turn to Madame Normandin. She will speak to you, or she'll ask your questions en français, so I hope you're on your English translation. With that, 6 minutes, Madame Normandin.
Thank you to the two witnesses. It's a pleasure to see you again, Dr. Ross. I'll have questions for you as well. My first question is for Dr. Taylor and to Dr. Ross as well. Both of you spoke to the fact that the acquisition processes are long at the moment when the needs are determined, and then we determine what will be the parameters of the call for tenders. So is the same thing true in the other way when we have the end user then can make comments on the quality of the product, on improvements to make to the product? So is this an issue that you see also in your respective fields?
Is that to me first? There are two aspects to this. Are we okay?
Please go ahead.
There are two aspects. Yes. Yeah, there are two aspects to this. One is when equipment gets delivered, high technology new kit, there are often small or sometimes not so small defects in it that get fixed by engineering processes either in government or in the company. And that's quite normal. You don't expect a big complicated piece of kit to work absolutely perfectly from day one. We do our best, but it happens. And sometimes it's if the shortcomings are really serious, then there's a big row. But that's relatively uncommon. The other part of it, though, is that in this day and age, you should know that certainly platforms that you acquire are going to have it's going to need fairly regular, constant updates on them. So this term "open system" is becoming commonplace, and by that it means that you can make improvements without taking the whole machine apart. That it's a relatively simple process to do. With software, that's often relatively easy. Sometimes it's more difficult with things like integrating new weapons onto a platform and so on. But fixing the immediate faults, but recognizing that a thing that's going to be in service even for a decade is going to need in-service improvements, and that you want some assurance that it is an open system. I could give you some examples, but 6 minutes doesn't allow that. But if you write in, I'll send you some examples.
And I'm not sure that I understand the question based on the discussion we just had. Would it be okay to repeat it? I just want to make sure I am giving you what you're looking for.
Yes, I'll integrate a new element. So the fact that you spoke about working with the industry, with non-traditional suppliers. So when the end user has recommendations to make in order to improve a system or a product that was delivered, is the supply chain rapid enough so that problems can be corrected, so that improvements can be, suggested improvements can actually be made?
Okay, I much understand now. Okay. I would echo what Dr. Taylor said about modular open systems approach. It was one of the key pieces of acquisition reform we attempted in this last round of reforms. Also, I will note that if the requirements are written in a certain way, in the correct way, it provides better opportunity to truly attain what the end user is looking for. The end user and the acquisition community being, of course, two different communities. And I'm not sure that we have much more time than that, so I'll leave it there.
Merci. J'aimerais revenir, Dr. Taylor.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. I'd like to come back to a comment that you made, that acquisitions oftentimes can seek to reach multiple objectives. You spoke to national unity in speaking of Scotland, for example. Is there a sufficient amount of transparency when there are diverse goals in the procurement process, or perhaps there's some type of improvement so that the population might be better informed of these non-military objectives that are being sought after during the procurement process?
Well, the Ministry of Defence and the government are quite open about their policy stances, and you can read about them in policy documents. Whether the general population is whether to take on this burden is quite a different matter. But what we've done in the UK is that where they feed into the formal acquisition procurement processes are very much come to the fore when you try to do a competition, because you have to provide, we call it an assessment scheme. I think in the US it's an evaluation scheme, but the purpose is the same. You have to tell the bidders how much weight you're going to give to different considerations. And so in Britain, certainly today, we have the idea of a levelling up agenda. That's to say, doing things for the economically poorer areas of the UK, and various other things like environmental considerations, but also the extent it will contribute to prosperity. And if you do put those two together, it can be allowed up to 20% in the evaluation schemes that are put to contractors. So they've got an idea of what they got to offer.
Thank you. Thank you, Madame
Contractors
Rondy.
treat that as really heavy. Yeah.
Mr. Angus, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last winter, I was in Berlin meeting with the Social Democratic government, and we were in meetings, and at one point, one of the officials just stopped and then sort of looked around the room and said, who would have imagined that we would be in a massive European tank war in the 21st century? So the Ukraine war has upended everything, and we are scrambling now coming into the second winter to be able to supply all manner of needs, from coats to surface-to-air missiles to Leopard tanks to light armored vehicles. Madame Ross, what strain has that put on the procurement and the need to be able to suddenly shift gears dramatically in terms of what we're supplying in the military realm?
Thank you. So I think the situation in Ukraine has been enlightening for the Defense Department in terms of how it manages its relationships with industry in particular. So if you take a look at the example of munitions and the munitions industrial base, what we found, or what we're seeing today, is that much of the material that we are utilizing and providing to Ukraine, things like 155 millimeter rounds of artillery, are things that we don't buy consistently and don't spend a lot of money on compared to the rest of platforms or material that we purchase throughout the Department of Defense. The consequence of that is that there is an inconsistent demand signal to the defense industry. Without purchase orders and actual money coming on contract, companies will not usually invest their capital in facilities to have capacity, production capacity for something that the Department of Defense is not buying, or not buying regularly. And so as such, they optimize their production lines, and with the goal of efficiency and value, they ensure that they have, they optimize and they reduce these lines. The effect, again, is that when we ask suddenly to produce more, in this example, 155 millimeter shells, they're not able to immediately start producing more. It takes time to have that throughput go through the industrial base. And in this, in these cases, the ramp up was several months. And I think at the beginning of the response to Ukraine, it's well cited in the news articles that some munitions were taking, upwards of 2 years to be the estimated arrival time for them. And of course, the Department of Defense was concerned with that and looked very closely at why that is. But as I said, these are often, there's often a symbiotic relationship between the defense industrial base and the customer, in this case, the Department of Defense.
I think it adds a lot of pressure here in Canada. We're a small player. We do international deployments, but in my region, which is a large constituency in northern Canada, if you asked my citizens what the number one military need this past summer during catastrophic climate fires is, we didn't have Hercules aircraft to lift people out of the fire zones. So we're using our military for flood. We're using them for fire, for all kinds of domestic needs, and I think similar situation in the United States. We're trying to respond to Ukraine because we have a very close emotional and historic relationship, but we're having to provide materials that probably were not considered necessary since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And we also have some of our allies like Hungary that's just not doing anything to help. So it puts us in a difficult position to be able to supply the needs to stop the Putin war machine. Do you see that things are going to start improving, or do we have to shift gears in terms of friendshoring? Do we have to shift who does what so that we actually get supplies to Ukraine?
With enough advance notice, we're able to adjust the industrial base. And I can't speak to the other countries' industrial base, but I can speak to the U.S. industrial base. With enough advance notice, we're able to produce the material that we need. And in fact, the items that were going to Ukraine, such as in this case, this example I'll keep using is munitions. The Department of Defense has or awarded several contracts that have ramped up the production to very large amounts. I think nearly 85,000 or 100,000 rounds per month, which is a dramatic increase to what we were seeing at the beginning of our assistance to Ukraine. So there is a much work that's being done, and there are opportunities to always do more. And I think that the Department of Defense routinely is looking at friendshoring as well.
Thank you. Well, we certainly have General Dynamics in London, Ontario, that can provide light armored vehicles. We may not be able to compete on the Leopard tank front, but we could turn that around fairly quickly. But again, it's a question of do we need a broader strategy of all of the allies saying what is going to be supplied and how do we do it fast? Because we have to, coming into the second year of the war, we really have to put a stop to the Putin war machine.
Very briefly, please.
Alexis, if I may call you that, you made the chief points. The defense industry sizes itself according to the level of demand, and in the UK too, we're boosting munitions production capacity. I think there's an important point, which is that the simpler the product, and an artillery shell is, let's face it, a fairly simple product, the more of it can be automated, the easier it is to increase production capacity in an acceptable way. The more that increasing production capacity involves employing a lot of people, then as soon as that that war demand disappears, you have to decide what you're going to do with those people. You can leave a machine working 8 hours a day for 5 days and switch it to 24, but you can't take a person that's working 8 hours a day and turn them. You've got to employ more people. So Alexis got it. It's really difficult.
Unfortunately, we are going overtime. We can't employ people overtime in this committee either. We have 25 minutes worth of questions, and we have 20 minutes worth of time, colleagues. So 5 minutes just became 4. Mr. Kelly, 4 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to, Dr. Ross, if I may continue on the production of artillery shells. We've had testimony at this committee that in Canada, we have not increased our production of 155 shells since the beginning of the war. And we've been told many of the reasons that you've explained about why it's difficult, but yet in the United States, if I understand your testimony correctly, you said that artillery shell production has already increased, and that, and I don't know what it might have been 18 months ago, but you said now gone to 100,000 per month. What can you tell this committee about how to get critical material like 155 shells up and running? There's a mothballed factory north of Montreal that until fairly recently produced this item on a larger scale, but there has been nothing has broken through and enabled us to get that production increased.
I think two major elements to this are workforce. As Dr. Taylor mentioned, it is critically difficult once you have laid off or you have mothballed or reduced production. One of the hardest parts is ramping back up a skilled labor workforce. This is not, you can't just pull a person off a street and explain, and start having them do some of these hazardous projects. There's a degree of training involved and artisan craft work for some of the things. Like, we don't have a very large skilled labor workforce of welders, for example, in the United States.
If I may, in your testimony, you had just said, if I understood you correctly, though, that the production has increased, and it has not in Canada. So I'm wondering what was successful. How were you able to overcome in the United States these obstacles to, even if it took a matter of months, to actually get the contracts in place and get the production going?
So the call went out for munitions probably in the spring of 2022, if I remember correctly. And in the course of the last year and change, much work has been done between the Department of Defense and its prime suppliers in the ammunition industrial base to attempt to find all of the, what I would call, bottlenecks. These are usually workforce and long lead items. So individual components of the munition that are hard to find or hard to produce. And so a lot of dedicated work went into finding second sources of supply for those long lead items and getting the production facilities open and scaled up.
All right. We heard about Senator Sullivan's testimony Congress had quite an impact on a number of people in Canada. He spoke then about the shortcomings in Canada holding up its end of continental defense. NORAD modernization is an example of very close partnership between Canada and the United States. I'd like you to maybe comment on the necessity for NORAD modernization, and if you can identify anything for this committee or to Canadians on how Canada can best play and uphold its responsibilities for NORAD modernization.
In 20 seconds or less.
Actually, I can do this really quickly. I'm not familiar with what Senator Sullivan's statements were, and I'm not really an expert on NORAD modernization, so I'd hazard to even comment.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Madame, yes.
Lalonde?
Chair, Professor Taylor, Dr. Ross, I want to say thank you for joining us today, especially in your respective time zone, as I understand. In the last few meetings that we had on this study, some witnesses did discuss the importance of improving our defense procurement by actually simplifying the processes and certainly streamlining the layers of policy that impede procurement. Based on both of your experience, what is the most important lesson the government or government should learn from discussions to help face the current challenges in actually simplifying and certainly streamlining the procurement processes, if I may ask?
The situation in the UK is very different from in the US because the volume of law that Dr. Ross referred to doesn't exist in the UK, but there is a lot of guidance and a lot of a little bit of law about procurement. I think you have to, processes are there for two reasons. One is to make sure that you're buying just the right thing and the right priority with the money. And the other is to make sure that, you know, the behavior of the parties involved isn't improper in any way. And those are risks which are well recognized. But what's less well recognized is that if you take these through sequentially, if you have a very measured system, you have other risks, which are that your equipment doesn't arrive in time or it's out of date with the things that we're familiar with. I would quickly observe that in many aspects of life, but certainly in defense acquisition, trust among the people that are doing the work, trust in their judgment and in their integrity, saves a lot of work and saves a lot of time, but it's a fairly scarce thing in government and something that public procurement officials are reluctant to rely on.
What I'll add is I'll speak to your point about layers in simplifying or streamlining that. In the Department of Defense, our program managers, those who are responsible for managing the program as it goes through the process, they this last round of acquisition reforms sought to simplify the layers and to delegate some of the decision-making authority from the highest levels of the Pentagon down to the next higher levels. So rather than having the Secretary of Defense level making decisions on certain programs, we now have delegated that decision-making authority to the Secretary of the military departments, so the Army, Navy, Air Force. We found that when the program managers had to go all the way up to the Office of the Secretary of Defense for reviews and approvals, of course, going through their respective military service department, it created an additional amount of administrative requirements, justification documents, and frankly, just time in the Pentagon briefing senior leaderships twice at your service level, in other words, the Navy, Air Force, and Army, and then again at the Secretary of Defense level. So we found there to be a great streamlining that was done that could be accomplished, and it's currently in progress right now. We've had that for about 6 or 7 years, and it certainly has decreased some of the time and burden of the process.
On 1.5 minutes, Madame Normandine.
Merci.
Thank you. My question is for Professor Taylor. In a report in July 2023, I understand that the UK described the procurement process as having very little accountability. And if the fact that we can put the blame on the minister responsible for procurement as much as the Minister of Defense when there's an issue, it gives me the impression that it's not always easy to have accountability. I'd like to know what makes accountability so difficult with regards to procurement decisions.
I have a quick answer to that, which is I think that you use the word blame. And if inquiries into why things have gone wrong are looking for blame, then people, of course, don't tell you, speak accurately because they don't want to put in evidence that leads it being put on them. In the recommendations that I've made, and our minister actually took it with regard to one of our major programs that did go wrong. Accountability should be asking people what they decided when and why and seeing what grounds they had. Because generally speaking, people do not go to work thinking, I'm going to wreck this project. So in order to make things better, you've got to understand why people did things, why they decided what they did, and on what grounds. And that means that you are not searching desperately for blame. You're searching for understanding. And if you do look for blame, you will not get good understanding.
Norman Dean.
That doesn't apply if you've got a corruption issue, but I'm just talking about the regular processes that we've been discussing so far.
Mr. Angus, minute and a half.
Thank you, Chair. Procurement's a funny thing because the public always gets told that the lowest bid on a ship is going to be the best thing ever. And then, of course, everybody knows the price is going to go through the roof. We have the Canadian Surface Combatants Project, originally tagged at $60 billion, now coming in at $84 billion. Who knows where it ends up? So for me as a legislator, that extra $24 billion, that would hire a lot of nurses, fix a lot of my roads, and make sure that some of my northern Indigenous communities aren't living in third world conditions. So, Professor Taylor, you talk about spiral acquisition. Is this just what is part of the game of procurement, or is there a way that we can actually put the real costs in so we know what we're dealing with when we go back to our citizens and tell them why they're buying these very, very expensive projects?
Well, every project's different, got particular characteristics, but I said something, I think, you acquired your ship by a competitive process, and that may have been vulnerable, and it's also a slow process, so that I don't know how the requirements have changed since the, commitment to a contract was made. But so I think you have to have, my view is that in this day and age, we have to have a more cooperative view about trying to calculate what the cost is likely to be. If you want a further complication, which you may not like, but most platforms cost much more to run in service over their life than they do to buy in the first place. So in a way, in looking at the acquisition cost, you are focusing on something which is relatively unimportant. The thing that really is going to take your dollars is looking after it once in service, and that gets less attention because it's less difficult. It's more difficult to pin down.
Okay, we're unfortunately going to have to leave it there. I'm sorry to keep running this hard clock on you, but it just is what it is. Ms. Gallant, 4 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to ask both questions in one shot, and they can split the time. So, Dr. Rossi, do you know if any of your colleagues have completed any reports on the status of the Army, Navy, or Air Force with respect to the Canadian Armed Forces, and if any of those reports that we should be expecting? And Professor Taylor, would you compare and contrast the UK's acquisition of the Upholder Victoria-class submarines to Canada's acquisition process for those very same vessels? Because hopefully we'll be in the market for some more submarines, and we don't want to be using that same process this time around.
That I'll start and note that I am not aware of any Army, Navy, or Air Force reports related to the Canadian Armed Forces or acquisition.
Dr. Taylor?
The Upholder procurement process actually predates my awareness of the situation. I can tell you how we are looking at procuring submarines. We got two things about procuring submarines. One is that we left a big gap between procuring the last of our bomber, the bomber fleet, the nuclear bomber fleet, and the attack submarines. And the result is it cost us a fortune because we really learnt employment at the yard went from 17,000 to 3,000. And when we tried to start building astute submarines, we found there was lots of difficulties because of skill shortages. Second thing is that when we look to the current generation of submarines that we're building, which is the new Dreadnought class of nuclear weapon submarines, we're doing that from the beginning of an alliance between the one company that can build them and the government and the Navy and the procurement authorities. It's called the Submarine Delivery Alliance, and they are working together They have a generous budget, like you might say. It's a significant sum of money, but they report annually on the processes, on the progress that's being made, and it's another of these areas where we know we can't have a competition for who can build a nuclear submarine. So what we can do is the parties know the importance of it, and even down to the workforce. So that's how we're doing submarines currently.
Okay. And what has the UK done to speed up its procurement process?
Well, when
overcome the inertia of making change, essentially.
Well, the quick thing is when there's a crisis, we do very well because we cut out a lot of the process, and we take, because the risks of being late are greater than the risk of perhaps a bad choice or a priority that shouldn't quite be a priority. Those processes are shortened, and we have an urgent operational requirements process, which enables people to avoid competitions, not always, but sometimes, or if there is a competition, it's on a very basic level. And so the UK record on doing urgent operational requirements, and that includes getting things to Ukraine, is pretty good. The issues arise when we look to think about, well, the Army needs a new reconnaissance vehicle or something like that, which does take forever and is a real mess.
Thank you. Not that we know anything about messes around here. Mr. Collins gets to ask the question he never asked before.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Taylor, let me start with you. We're interested in certainly scaling back the level of or the number of barnacles on the bottom of the ship here in terms of the internal policies and controls that we look at. Most of the study and the recommendations have come through, have talked about those the policies that drive procurement here with our level of government. But you emphasized in your opening the need for closer dialogue between industry and government. What role does industry play with procurement reform?
Well, with procurement reform, I think it's not massive in the sense, but there is there's a decently close government contact group with the major companies, major suppliers, and they articulate and spell out, not that the government always takes notice, but some of the costs and risks of the processes that the MOD uses. I think so there is a dialogue, and if you look at British policy statements, I can let you have some, but you will see that the government has recognised that industry, it needs to have a better partnering relationship with industry, not an adversarial relationship. I hesitate to go over time, so I won't say more than that, but that is strongly recognised in government. It's not always practiced, but it's recognised at government level.
Thanks. Ms. Ross, you mentioned cost, schedule, and performance. How can the private sector help us with that?
I think that a close relationship with the Department of Defense and its industrial base is critical for keeping the cost, schedule, and performance in right balance. Much of that has to happen early on in the early phases of a program. So when you're designing requirements, you need to feel comfortable, and you need to adequately utilize the insights that come from industry in telling you what is possible, or perhaps helping you think about the system or think about the weapon system in a way you might not have been. So helping you know a little bit more about the requirement and informing what technological capabilities could address the capability gap that you're seeking. So I think that constant communication is critically important. A lot of our rules and processes are, they preclude that in some cases to avoid issues of, I'm trying to think of non-jargon, U.S. jargon. They try to avoid situations where you could have competition issues where they would incite protests by losing bidders in contracts. So we have to strike a balance. It often makes the workforce, those rules often make the workforce very risk averse and hesitant to communicate at all. And it takes leadership, people that are in senior positions, encouraging them and really covering and having their back to do so that they feel comfortable engaging in the appropriate ways with industry to inform both the requirements and the program.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Collins. And on behalf of the committee, I wanted to thank both of you for your testimony. Particularly, I want to thank Professor Taylor, who is, 5 hours ahead of us. So I should imagine that your next stop is to bed. Yes. Oh, maybe it's to the pub. I don't really know. And maybe you can have a conversation about dueling barnacles. Colleagues, again, thank you, and I'll leave it to you to sign off. Colleagues, I just want to remind you that the deadline for witness submissions for rising domestic operational deployment meetings is tomorrow. So if you want to put in more witnesses, and on Thursday it's the PBO, and our esteemed clerk has either sent you a calendar or is about to send you a calendar. So that should occupy the rest of 2023. With that, meeting adjourned.